day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a...
Really? I thought...
Well, was it? Well, I can tell you now, it was the worst royal engagement I ever did. You know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish. You know, the whole thing was just stage managed to suit them. Worst royal wedding I ever did. He was angry, and I felt, you know, we were punished for that. To offend our queen, like he did in that book, you know, it really upset the king. And you know, I don't think you could easily forgive that. And I imagine the king's had strong words with him over it.
The date is January 2026, and the royal world finds itself engulfed in a firestorm that no one, not even the most cynical commentators, truly saw coming. For nearly 8 years, the global public has been sold a very specific, carefully curated, and glossy version of the 19th of May 2018. We were told through slick PR campaigns and breathless television commentary that it was a modern fairy tale that changed the monarchy forever. We were told it was the day sunshine broke through the gray British clouds, gospel choirs sang of a new age, and a beautiful American bride ushered in a limitless era of inclusivity and joy. We were told it was the wedding of the century, a celebration of love that the entire world, including the voracious British media, embraced with open arms. But today, that narrative has been shattered, not by a tabloid rumor, not by a bitter courtier, and not by an anonymous palace aide whispering in a hallway. It has been dismantled by the one man who saw what the television cameras were never allowed to see, the one man whose lens has captured the truth of the House of Windsor for half a century.
The photographers they engaged for the job was 5 feet away. You know, it was just hopeless. And then the carriage shot, when they went past me in the carriage, they looked the other way. So for me, it was a disaster.
Arthur Edwards is not merely a photographer. He is a royal institution in his own right. He is the legendary lensman for The Sun, who has been embedded within the royal circle since 1977. He has photographed 7 royal weddings, 5 funerals, 8 royal births, and virtually every major state event in the last 48 years. He was there when Diana stepped out of the glass coach, looking shy and overwhelmed. He was there when Kate walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, looking like a future queen. He was there for the Queen's golden, diamond, and platinum jubilees, and he stood in the rain for her final journey. This 83-year-old man has seen it all, documented it all, and kept the secrets of the family for decades. But he has finally gone on record to drop a nuclear bomb that completely rewrites the history of Harry and Meghan's union. Arthur Edwards has officially labeled Harry and Meghan's wedding as the absolute worst royal engagement he has ever covered in 48 years of service.
You know, and then Oprah Winfrey had met them once. She was a guest of the Clooneys, you know, the guests. I mean, never met them before, but they were the guests. And, you know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish, you know.
Did you get a sense then that they wanted out, that they wanted a California life, that they wanted showbiz, that they weren't interested? If they weren't interested in making people feel welcome at the wedding,
He didn't just say it was difficult. He didn't just say it was stressful. He used words that cut to the bone of the memory. He called the day miserable. He said he hated it. He called it a complete disaster from start to finish. But what makes this revelation so explosive is that Edwards isn't complaining about the weather, the parking, or the long hours. He is revealing exactly what happened behind those castle walls where the public couldn't see. He is exposing an orchestrated, calculated plan to make the British press feel unwelcome, punished, and humiliated. He is describing the specific moment in the carriage procession when Harry and Meghan literally turned their backs on him to deny him a photograph. This is the story of how a day that should have been about love was allegedly used as a weapon of revenge against the very people who had helped build Prince Harry's popularity.
The guest list, beyond the lone family member she invited, was simply inviting celebrities who were total strangers to her. I could see, especially with a wedding of this scale, inviting a handful of people who you do not know, but certainly not to this extent. There were a huge amount of guests who she had never met. Some people didn't even come. Like, for example, Reese Witherspoon said, "Why would I go? I don't even know them."
To truly understand the gravity of Arthur Edwards speaking out, one must first understand the weight of his career and his unique standing within the royal ecosystem. This is not some random paparazzo hiding in the bushes with a telephoto lens. This is a man who was awarded an MBE for his services to photography. He traveled the world with the Queen on the royal yacht Britannia. He watched Prince Harry grow up through the lens of his camera, often capturing the young prince sticking his tongue out or playing pranks. He had a relationship with the family built on decades of trust, respect, and professional courtesy. The royals knew Arthur. They often stopped to chat with him. When a man with that level of access and history says a wedding was the worst he has ever seen, it carries a significance that cannot be dismissed as bitterness. He has 6 other royal weddings to compare it to. He saw the nervous tension of Charles and Diana, the relaxed joy of William and Kate, the second chance happiness of Charles and Camilla, and the quiet dignity of Edward and Sophie. He has seen weddings plagued by scandal and weddings plagued by rain, yet he maintains that none of them were even close to the hostility and misery he experienced on Harry and Meghan's day.
Harry was angry with us, really, because some of the things that have been said about Meghan, and quite rightly, some of the things that were said about Meghan during the engagement were pretty harsh. I want to sort of mention them now, but some of them were pretty unfair as well. And so he was angry, and I felt, we were punished for that. And in fact, I never got one picture in the paper published from that day.
The story Edwards tells begins with the setup itself, which he describes as being deliberately designed to fail the press. Usually, at a royal wedding, the trusted members of the British press, known as the Royal Rota, are given prime positions. It is a symbiotic relationship where the palace grants access so the photographers can share the joy with the millions of people watching at home. It is an understanding that the monarchy exists to be seen, but for Harry and Meghan's wedding, Edwards revealed that this protocol was thrown out the window. He stated that every single photograph he took had to be captured on long lenses from ridiculous distances. He described having to use an 800mm lens just to photograph guests arriving at the chapel.
I think, I've done some really lovely royal weddings. I did both King Charles's weddings. I did William's wedding. I did Andrew's wedding. I did Sophie and Edward. They were lovely occasions. But that today, I couldn't get out of Windsor quick enough. I promise you that.
The worst royal wedding.
To put that into perspective, for anyone who isn't a photographer, an 800mm lens is a piece of equipment typically reserved for wildlife photographers trying to capture a lion on the savannah from the safety of a Jeep 300 yards away. It is the kind of lens sports photographers use from the roof of a stadium to catch a player on the field. It is massive, heavy, requires a tripod, and creates a flat, distant image that lacks intimacy. It is absolutely not the lens one uses to capture the emotion of a wedding day. By forcing the British press to use this equipment, Harry and Meghan were effectively treating them like snipers rather than guests. They were pushing them back to the horizon. Edwards called the situation hopeless, noting that it was nearly impossible to get a decent, intimate shot from that distance.
He decided to leave the royal family and go his own way in the United States, and he's just behaving, I think, sometimes appallingly. Certainly some of the things he said about members of the royal family, certainly, and Camilla and Catherine and his brother. I think you just don't do that with families.
The insult was compounded when Edwards looked around and saw the alternative. While the British press corps, the people who had covered Harry's first day at school and his military service, were banished to the nosebleed seats, Edwards watched as the official photographer Harry and Meghan had hired for themselves, Alexei Lubomirsky, was positioned just 5 feet away. Lubomirsky was granted the access to get the perfect close-ups, the artistic angles, and the intimate moments that would later be sold to the world as the official record of the day. Edwards realized in that moment that this was not about privacy, nor was it about security. It was about control and punishment. They wanted the world to see only what they curated, only the polished, edited version of reality, and they wanted the press, who had supported Harry for years, to feel completely excluded from the narrative.
Most of that interview was left on the cutting room floor because it was so one-sided and it was so unfair. And I think about watching it now, and the bit about Archie and the colour of his skin. And I knew they'd be seething. I knew the Queen would be seething. I knew that the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles would be seething. It would be so unfair.
But the technical sabotage was only the beginning. The most damning part of Edward's confession involves the iconic carriage ride through the streets of Windsor. This was the moment the public had been waiting for. We all remember the broadcast footage of Harry and Meghan waving to the cheering crowds, looking like the perfect happy couple, basking in the adoration of the public. Edwards was positioned on a specific spot along the route, a spot he had likely occupied for previous royal events. It is standard procedure for the couple, knowing where the press pin is, to look over, smile, and wave to ensure the newspapers have the celebratory image the next morning. It is a moment of professional courtesy. When William and Kate passed him in 2011, they looked right down the lens, smiled, and shared the moment. Even Charles and Diana, amidst all their tension in 1981, knew the protocol and gave the photographers the shot they needed.
And it's one of the saddest things of all, Matt, of course, is that the children don't get to see their grandfather, either grandfather, and that's really so awful, because they're not getting to meet their cousins and to know their cousins, and it's such a shame for them.
Edwards revealed that when Harry and Meghan's carriage approached his position, something completely different happened. He stated that as they went past, they deliberately turned away from him. This was not a casual glance to the other side of the street to look at a fan. This was not them being caught up in the emotion of the moment. Edwards describes it as a calculated snub. They saw him standing there, a man Harry had known since he was a baby, a man who had joked with him on tours in Africa, and they intentionally turned their heads so that he would only see the backs of their necks. They denied him the shot. On their wedding day, in the middle of a global celebration, they chose to be petty. They chose to use their procession to send a message that the British press was the enemy and would not be given even a crumb of cooperation. It was a cold, hostile maneuver that left Edwards feeling that the day was not a celebration of unity, but an act of war against the media.
When he was over for the Invictus Games ceremony, he didn't want to stay in a royal residence that was offered to him by the king because he didn't feel he had enough protection there.
This hostility didn't emerge from a vacuum. Arthur Edwards also revealed the exact moment he believes Prince Harry's personality completely changed, transforming from the most popular, lovable royal into the bitter, distant figure we see today. For decades, Harry was known as the photographer's dream. He was the fun prince, the one who would stick his tongue out at the cameras as a child, the one who would joke with the press pack on tours in Africa. Edwards recalled how Harry used to say that he would do everything he could to make sure the photographers got good shots because he understood that their work helped his charities. There was a mutual respect and a sense of camaraderie. Harry knew the names of the photographers. He asked about their families. He understood that they were the conduit between him and the people.
Excuse, I think he wanted to stay in a hotel, and he was determined to do that. And don't forget, he travels with a small retinue of bodyguards as well. And so I suspect that was the reason why he did it. He had his own protection, and he felt that was enough.
Then came Manchester. Edwards describes a specific day in that city, shortly after Harry had met Meghan, as the turning point where the old Harry died. Edwards was there to photograph an engagement, expecting the usual friendly banter and cooperation. Instead, he was met with a wall of ice. Harry refused to look at him. He refused to say hello. He wouldn't even acknowledge Edwards' presence. The photographer described the scene vividly, stating that Harry simply got in the car and drove off without a word, treating him like a stranger or, worse, an intruder. Edwards is convinced that this change was instantaneous and directly linked to his relationship with Meghan. He believes that from the moment they fell in love, Meghan began rewriting the narrative in Harry's head, turning the press from a necessary part of royal life into a dangerous enemy that had to be fought at every turn. She reframed his entire existence, convincing him that the people who had chronicled his life were actually his abusers. The situation became so toxic that Arthur Edwards, a man who loved his job more than anything, eventually made a decision that would have been unthinkable years prior. He stopped covering Harry and Meghan's events altogether. He admitted in a podcast interview that he simply found it too depressing. He said they hated the media so much that it made the work miserable. He couldn't stand the atmosphere of hostility and judgment that radiated from them. So, for the sake of his own mental health and professional pride, he ducked out of their tours. He didn't cover their tour of Australia in 2018, the one that Meghan complained was exhausting. He didn't go to South Africa in 2019, where Meghan famously asked if anyone had asked if she was okay. Instead, Edwards chose to cover Charles and Camilla in New Zealand, or follow William and Kate, going where he was treated with basic human dignity. It is a damning indictment of the Sussexes that a veteran loyalist found them so unbearable, he voluntarily walked away from the biggest story in the world because he refused to be treated like a villain. It wasn't just Arthur Edwards who sensed that something was off on that wedding day. The discomfort radiated outward, touching even the highest echelons of the family. Reports have since surfaced that Queen Elizabeth II herself had deep reservations about the event, specifically regarding Meghan's choices. Royal biographer Ingrid Seward revealed that the late Queen, a woman of immense tradition and protocol, thought Meghan's wedding dress was inappropriate. Seward wrote that in the monarch's view, it was not appropriate for a divorcee getting remarried in a church to look quite so flamboyantly virginal. That phrase, flamboyantly virginal, is a stinging critique from a woman who rarely voiced her opinions. It suggests that the Queen saw through the performance. She saw a woman playing a role, the innocent bride, that didn't match the reality of her life or her past. This detail connects deeply to everything Edwards is revealing. It paints a picture of a couple who were completely out of step with the institution they were marrying into. The dress choice showed a lack of respect for tradition and a misunderstanding of the solemnity of a church wedding for a divorcee in the eyes of the head of the Church of England. The treatment of the press showed a lack of respect for duty. The Carriage Snub showed a lack of respect for the people who had chronicled Harry's life. The Queen saw it, Arthur Edwards saw it. Anyone who was paying close attention saw that this wedding wasn't a celebration of service or monarchy. It was a celebration of ego and a launch party for a brand that would eventually try to rival the crown itself. Furthermore, Edwards' account casts a harsh light on the guest list of that day, which contributes to the miserable atmosphere he described. A wedding is typically a gathering of friends and family, a reunion of people who have shaped the lives of the bride and groom. Yet, looking back, Edwards and other observers noted the strangeness of the congregation. George's chapel was filled with Hollywood A-listers, Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney, Serena Williams, people whom Harry and Meghan barely knew, if they knew them at all. Meanwhile, old friends of Harry, people he had served with, people he had grown up with, were pushed to the margins or excluded entirely. The press, who had watched Harry grow from a boy to a man, were treated as enemies. The resulting atmosphere was not one of warmth and intimacy, but of a networking event. It felt hollow. It felt produced. And for a man like Edwards, who values authenticity and connection, it was a deeply alienating experience to witness the erasure of Harry's real life in favor of a celebrity fantasy. The tragedy of this story, as Edwards tells it, is the loss of Prince Harry. Edwards speaks of the Duke of Sussex not with anger, but with a profound sense of sadness. He remembers the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin and the young man who charmed the world. He remembers the soldier who served in Afghanistan and the humanitarian who launched the Invictus Games, that Harry was accessible, relatable, and grounded. The Harry that Edwards encountered on that miserable wedding day and the Harry who ignored him in Manchester was a different person entirely. He describes a man who has become self-important, distant, and convinced of his own victimhood. Edwards recently noted that Harry thinks he is bigger than he actually is now that he is in California, just another celebrity in a town full of celebrities, rather than the significant figure he was in Britain. Edwards is also convinced that reconciliation is impossible, and he places the blame squarely on Meghan. He stated that if Harry ever wants to return to the United Kingdom, Meghan will cause problems. He believes she will never set foot in the palace again, and because she holds the reins in the relationship, Harry is effectively trapped in exile. This insight from someone who watched the couple interact up close is telling. It suggests that the isolation Harry finds himself in was not an accidental byproduct of Megxit, but a feature of the plan from the very beginning. By alienating the press, alienating the staff, and eventually alienating the family, the couple created a fortress where only their version of reality could exist. The release of these details in January 2026 feels like a final vindication for the British press. For years, Meghan and Harry have positioned themselves as the victims of a ruthless, racist, and intrusive media. They have used interviews, documentaries, and memoirs to paint a picture of themselves as hunted prey. But Edwards' testimony flips that narrative on its head. He exposes them not as victims, but as active aggressors. They were the ones who weaponized their wedding day. They were the ones who forced photographers to stand miles away. They were the ones who turned their backs. It wasn't the press attacking them. It was the Sussexes punishing the press for daring to do their jobs. This revelation forces the public to re-examine the entire timeline of the Sussex saga. If the hostility was this high on day one, on the very day of the wedding, then the narrative that the press turned on them later is false. The relationship was poisoned from the start by the couple themselves. They didn't give the media a chance. They decided, perhaps before the engagement was even announced, that the press was the enemy, and they treated them as such even when the press was there to celebrate them. Edward's story suggests that the couple's strategy was always confrontation, always conflict, because conflict keeps them in the headlines and feeds their narrative of persecution. When we look back at the photos of that wedding now, through the lens of Arthur Edwards' testimony, the images change. We no longer see just the glamour in the crowds. We see the 800mm lenses straining to get a shot from a mile away. We see the carriage turning away at the critical moment. We see the forced smiles hiding a deep-seated hostility. We see a family fracturing in real time. Arthur Edwards watched the People's Prince die the day he met Meghan, and he watched the funeral of that persona take place on his wedding day. The question that remains is how history will judge this moment. Will it be remembered as a great romance that defied the odds, as Meghan and Harry hope? Or will it be remembered as the moment a prince was led away from his duty, his family, and his true self by a partner who demanded total control? Arthur Edwards has made his judgment clear. He called it the worst day of his professional life. And considering he has spent 50 years photographing the ups and downs of the most famous family on earth, that is a verdict that will hang over the Sussex legacy forever. The fairy tale was a production, but the misery behind the scenes was the only thing that was real. The silence of the palace may hold for now, but the witnesses are speaking, and their stories are dismantling the illusion, one brick at a time.